Founder of Vanguard and the first index fund, Jack Bogle, noted that investing is not nearly as difficult as it looks, where successful investing involves doing a few things right and avoiding serious mistakes. To me, this is the best quote I could relate to for the Roth IRA, because with the 3 index funds I'm about to show you in this video, you're going to be able to get all the exposure you would need to build wealth over time while reducing risk of any serious mistakes. Of course, I'm not a financial advisor, but just a quick breakdown on what the Roth IRA is. It's pretty much a retirement account where you pay taxes on the money up front that you contribute into the account, where you can then invest in the account however you want, and at the age of retirement, that is 59 and a half and above, you can withdraw anything from the account completely tax-free, assuming you meet the 5-year rule, which for most of you, this shouldn't be an issue. And so with the Roth IRA, you have the option to control this entire account and invest however you want inside of it, and for me, I personally only use index funds. If you don't know what index funds are, they're pretty much a way to invest into hundreds to even thousands of companies all within one purchase. So knowing that, to get straight to it, the first index fund I believe is a need in the Roth IRA is a total stock market index fund, where one of the most popular options out there that is an ETF that you can purchase on nearly any platform would be through Vanguard's, which is the total stock market ETF with a ticker VTI. Now ETFs trade similar to individual stocks, so if you've ever bought, let's say, Apple, you would be a part owner of Apple and you would own their stock. Where if you were to instead buy an ETF like VTI, you would get exposure to 3,656 stocks all within that one purchase. And this is because the fund tracks the CRSP US Total Market Index, and that means you're getting exposed to large, mid, and small cap stocks across growth and value styles. Now this fund is market cap weighted, which means of the 3,656 stocks that are inside of this fund, they're going to be given weight based on the size of the companies that are inside of the fund. For example, you can see the top 10 holdings right here, where the largest ones are Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia. Each one's between roughly 5 to 6%, which makes sense because they are currently the 3 largest companies by market cap in the US. So by bundling up all these stocks that are inside of VTI and you purchase this one fund, that means that the sectors inside of this fund would include technology at 33.3% of the fund, then consumer discretionary at 13.5%, industrials at 12.7%, and financial and healthcare thereafter. There are many benefits to investing into a diversified fund like this that tracks many different market sectors within the US, but best of all, if the US economy continues to grow, so will your investment. For example, with this fund, over the past 10 years, it has averaged a 12.78% annual return, whereas since 2001, that average is 8.87%. And just so you know, that includes any expense that comes along with this fund, which is also referred to as the expense ratio, and for VTI, that number is 0.03%. But besides ETFs, you could also look into index mutual funds within the brokerage that you are investing on, such as Fidelity, Vanguard, or Charles Schwab. Now, index mutual funds are known to be less tax efficient, but because this isn't a Roth IRA where the taxes don't matter, and yet alone they're an index fund, so that issue is not going to be that big either way. It comes down to a personal preference on which one you would prefer, and if you're even on a brokerage that allows the index mutual fund. In case you're interested to learn more about the different types of options, if you're on Fidelity, you could look into the Fidelity Zero Fee Total Market Fund that has the ticker FZROX, which is relatively new compared to their original Total Market Index Fund with the ticker FSCAX, or say you're on Vanguard, you could then consider their VT-SAX, but just know they have a $3,000 minimum investment requirement. Or on Charles Schwab, you may be interested in SWTSX. Now these all track the total US stock market, so they're going to be very similar with slight differences. Where the Fidelity version FSCAX has a 0.015% expense ratio, the fund has a few more holdings now, being at 3,839 holdings, and since this fund was created in 1997, it has averaged an 8.94% annual return. So by simply getting one total stock market index fund over time, although past performance does not guarantee future results, averaging a 9% annual return could build up your Roth IRA extremely well over time, and that's safely. In fact, if you're at the age of 30 right now, just getting started, brand new to the Roth IRA, if you invested only in this total stock market index fund, if you did $7,000 per year, which is the limit and equates to $583 per month, that means by the age of 60, when you're eligible, you could have nearly $1 million in the account. The last thing I'll mention on shortly is that instead of one total stock market index fund, you could instead invest into a small, mid, and large cap fund. I like this approach because I get to control how much of each one I own, and I get to see how well each of them perform over time. For ETFs, you could consider Vanguard small cap ticker VB, mid cap ticker VO, and large cap, which is also referred to as the S&P 500, that is VOO. Please understand that VOO and VTI have an 87% overlap by weight between the two, so you do not need both of these in the same account. The holdings in both are very similar. And then on Fidelity, the ones I personally use are the small cap ticker FSSNX, the mid cap, which is the ticker FSMDX, and then the large cap, the S&P 500 index fund, FXAIX. But to keep things simplest, you could simply just get one total stock market index fund to give you broad exposure to the entire US economy, all within one purchase. Moving on from there, another index fund that I believe is a need in the Roth IRA is a large cap growth index fund. The best ETF options here consist of VUG, SCHG, and QQQM. I'll use SCHG as the example here, and the expense ratio for this fund is 0.04%. It tracks the total return of the Dow Jones US large cap growth total stock market index. Understand that this consists of large cap companies that exhibit growth characteristics, where the easiest way to see how this works is by the top holdings in the fund that are Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft, similar to the total US stock market, but now they contain much more weight, each being above 11%. You can also see that there's more weight toward the top sector, like 48% of infotech, and then there's other ones that are like 13% consumer discretionary, and many more thereafter. The biggest reason why this is a strong investment is not just the fact that it goes towards the growth investments, but also that there are many different sectors. So over a 10, 20, 30, or even 40-year horizon, it's going to adjust accordingly to the indexes that are doing the best. But the allocation towards growth allows you to have more opportunity to build wealth over time. In fact, SCHG has achieved a 16.48% annual return over the past 10 years, and since it was created in 2009, the average is 16.36% per year. Where if we look at QQQ, which if you're curious, QQQM tracks the same index, but it's just a newer, cheaper alternative, the fund tracks the NASDAQ 100 index that has beaten the S&P 500 8 out of the past 10 years. In fact, since it was created in 1999, the fund has outperformed the S&P 500 by 423% in total returns, becoming a comparison of 1,002% total growth compared to the S&P 500 at 579%. So $10,000 in 1999 in this fund would now be worth $110,000, which does not include any additional contributions. Where with the same amount in the S&P 500, that would now be worth roughly $68,000. Understand that a fund like SCHG only has 231 companies in this fund, so it is going to have more risk than if you were to get one with thousands of companies. Which, if you're curious, the Fidelity version I use is FSPGX, and for Schwab, they have SWLGX, and Vanguard has VIGAX. Like I said, the difference between ETFs and index mutual funds is a personal preference, and it also depends on the brokerage that you're on, but for me, being on Fidelity, I've started with their index mutual funds, and I've always liked them since I've started, which I've stuck with. To be completely transparent, in all of my taxable accounts, I use VOO, and I do not use any index mutual funds, and I would recommend that to anyone that asked. But because the Roth IRA is an account that you should not be touching for a long time, don't even plan on withdrawing the contributions. I know that you can do this without penalty, completely free, but I do believe that a small to medium amount of a growth fund in this portfolio is well worth the risk for potentially growing your portfolio much more over time. You see, a huge mistake that I learned about the Roth IRA is that if you have that many years until you're even going to touch the money and then slowly transition into stable investments, right now, there's really no point of getting low growth alternatives like REITs, dividend income funds, or even bond funds. In fact, I personally invested a small amount in bond funds to diversify the portfolio, but it really does not matter because I'm not touching the funds, and all it did was annoy me because the bond fund only grew 3% where my growth fund was up 50%. So the overall motto I like to look at for the Roth IRA is look for the strongest yet safest investments to provide the returns over time. Because of that, the last one that's on my list that I believe is a need in the Roth IRA for additional exposure, yet I keep this at a very small amount would be a total international stock. So to cover many different international stocks, the one I personally use on Fidelity is FTIHX, but an ETF version you could buy anywhere would be VXUS. But this fund has a 0.08% expense ratio and seeks to track the FTSE Global All Cap excluding the US index, which measures all types of stocks outside of the United States, which includes developed and emerging markets. Now this fund has 8,667 holdings, with the top ones being Taiwan Semiconductors and Samsung, where each one contains much lower weights toward the fund than the US index funds with all their large cap tech stocks. You can also see the top regions in the fund include Europe at 40%, then the Pacific and emerging markets both around 26%. And the reason that this has not been a popular alternative for investors, especially recently, is because over the past 10 years, it has averaged only a 5.43% annual return, which is obviously much lower than the first two index funds. But what's important to understand is that historically, there have been times where international stock has outperformed the US, and if things were to rotate soon, having a small portion could help your portfolio stay diversified and still see decent growth over time. Of course, no one knows what the future holds, but the reason that I keep this to a small amount of my entire portfolio is because there are many US companies that have operations and are generating revenue in international markets. For example, McDonald's has 14,000 locations in the US, but that's only 1/3 of all their locations, as they have many others in Japan, China, Germany, Canada, and many more. You can also see for Nike, only a small share in the color blue is generated in North America, where the rest is international. So because US stocks take up pretty much the entire world and have provided stronger returns throughout time, I prefer to have much more into those and only a small amount into international stocks. Now, there are many other growth index funds that you could consider investing into. That is a complete personal choice. You have to do your own research. But above all, just understand that with the Roth IRA, you want to look for strong yet safe long-term growth investments, which is exactly why I personally believe with the foundation of the Roth IRA being a total stock market index fund, large cap growth, and a small amount in international exposure provides everything you need to successfully build wealth within the Roth IRA. If you're interested to see exactly how I allocate each of my investments, consider checking out my Patreon that I have linked in the description below. And if you want to see my strategy with the Roth IRA or the best growth ETFs to consider, check out these videos right here, which I'll also leave videos related to these in the description of this video. And as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this.